Okay, I think we'll be able to get started shortly. Welcome, welcome, everyone. I see that there are quite a few people who are logging on. Thank you so much to everyone who joined us a bit earlier on. If you are just joining the call, you might miss the message. We've just asked you to please share with us your name and where you're dialing in from in the chat box while we wait. Just going to give it one more minute and then we'll be able to start officially. I see France, I see Ghana, I see the UK, Cape Town, South Africa, Nairobi, Kenya, Port Harcourt, Nigeria, Cameroon, Limpopo in South Africa. Such diverse representation from all over the continent, some parts in Europe as well. Welcome, welcome. Zimbabwe, Zambia, Kenya. Welcome, everyone. Okay, so I think we can start officially. Can I just get a thumbs up confirmation that everyone can see me and can hear me? Just a thumbs up. Brilliant. So hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where in the world and on the continent you may be joining us from. A very warm welcome to the ACRP Climate Storytellers Workshop. My name is Dimpo Lecheo, and I am the Communications Manager at the African Climate Reality Project. Now, if you're interacting with us, ACRP. If you hear me say ACRP, I'm referring to the African Climate Reality Project. For the first time, the African Climate Reality Project is the Africa branch of the Climate Reality Project, which is based in the US. We support climate reality leaders across the continent. We have about 3,000 of them now in taking the lead on climate through our current campaigns, which include building the climate movement or climate literacy, financing the just transition, as well as policy and international cooperation. As we get started, I'm going to ask a few people to share with us who they are, how are they feeling, and what expectations they have for today's workshop. So if you don't mind unmuting yourself, I think we can do this quite randomly so that it's quick. Let us know who you are, where you're dialing in from, and what you expect to get out of today's workshop in no more than 1 minute. Any volunteers? Okay. I think people are still a bit shy. No one wants to speak. Okay. We have Ulrich. Your hand is up. You're free to unmute.
Can you hear me? Good morning, everyone.
Hi, Ulrich.
Yes, good morning and good evening from wherever you're listening or attending this workshop. I'm Ulrich Wibe, PhD student at the University of Yaoundé 1 and educator and activist and passionate climate change and climate justice here in Cameroon. I'm happy to be here and I hope to learn more and to share what I know as far as concern climate.
Thank you so much for sharing that with us, Ulrich. Do we have one more person who would like to unmute and let us know where they're dialing in from, but also what some of the expectations for today are?
I may say my expectation of today is to learn how to get more knowledge about climate realities, especially in the African context, and trying to implement it in the Sudan region of Cameroon where I'm currently living.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing. So we've had two people from Cameroon, but we've also had two gentlemen. I am really enthusiastic to hear a woman's voice. If anyone would like to step up to the mic before we wrap up this session.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. You can go ahead. I hear that someone has unmuted.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can, loud and clear.
Okay. So my expectation for this workshop is to learn how to craft compelling stories and narratives that corresponds with my audience, especially my community. So I'm hoping that at the end of this workshop, I learn tactical skills and how I can use that skills to navigate through the climate space. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much to everyone who shared and who stuck to the time. I'm really happy to hear about those expectations because that is exactly what we're here to do today, right? To learn how to tell stories that speak to our communities, our audiences, how to tell stories about the ways in which the climate crisis is unfolding in Africa, but most importantly, how to position those stories in such a way that we inspire action rather than to leave people feeling more anxious about the climate crisis. As many of you may know, the climate crisis is a global challenge that affects everyone, but its impacts are not felt equally, right? Marginalized communities often bear the brunt of these consequences and face disproportionate hardships due to existing social and economic inequalities. And so being able to capture climate-related stories with urgency, accuracy, and integrity can really ensure that the voices of these communities are heard, that we understand the gravity of the crisis, and that we inspire meaningful action. And so this workshop will cover the techniques and the considerations that we all need to make when we tell stories and how to ensure that the voices and experiences of those at the heart of these stories are represented with integrity and respect. Now, as the African Climate Reality Project, we are not doing this by ourselves. We have wonderful speakers and partners from Scene Stories, from the Aspire Climate Vanguard, Media Monitoring Africa, as well as Sunshine Cinema, who will share a bit on their work while also giving us the practical knowledge on how to tell stories in a meaningful way. Now, like every other house, we do have a few house rules. So please ensure that your microphone and camera are off for the duration of the session, unless you are asking a question or making a contribution. We are going to have 2 question and answer sessions. So please hold on to any questions and contributions that you may have. If you don't get the chance to ask your question, please do leave it in the chat box and the team will ensure that we are able to make sure that your question reaches the right people. So on today's program, we will start with a short presentation on Storytelling 101 by myself. We will then follow with a storytelling in the African context teaching, and that will come from the Aspire Climate Vanguard. We will then jump into a very practical session on storytelling techniques, as well as a bit of editing 101 by Scene. And then we will round up by having a talk on representation and finally taking a look at how you can take your stories and work them into your communities. Now, to get us started, I'm going to share a bit about the African Climate Reality Project, our work, and why storytelling is such an important part of the work that we do. Okay, B, I think you can move on to the second slide. Yes. So today we're going to be covering storytelling, what it is, why it matters, and how you can use this for climate action and climate education. I'm also going to be sharing some practical tips towards the end that will connect everything that we're going to learn to COP, but not COP in particular, just any climate conference. We chose to focus on COP because it is obviously the biggest climate negotiations platform. But we know that in between there are multiple conferences and just big climate moments, sometimes in our communities or even outside of our countries, like the recent Africa Climate Summit, where we have opportunities to tell stories about what is happening at those climate conferences, but most importantly, what are the stories that are coming out of the decisions that are being made? What are the stories that are coming out of the negotiations? And how do those negotiations and those decisions that are being made in those spaces ultimately affect communities? Next slide. So this is a bit about the storytelling work that we do at ACRP. Storytelling really is at the heart of our work. As the Africa branch, it's impossible for us to do the work that we do without including stories, right? Visual and otherwise. And that's because I think storytelling is inherently in us as Africans. A lot of the ways in which we pass down our culture, we pass down our indigenous practices is just by telling stories. And so we don't believe in just sharing data, but we share human stories that inspire action and connect with communities. As mentioned earlier, African communities do bear the brunt of the climate crisis, but are often left out of climate policy and decision making. And so it's incredibly important to keep telling our stories so that we showcase the ways in which we are affected by the crisis. Now, we have multiple storytelling projects and platforms at ACRP. We use social media, videography, filmmaking, murals, as well as culture to communicate the work that we do, as well as the work that we do in communities. You can check out all of our videos as well as our short films on our YouTube page. One of my colleagues will drop the link in the chat box. Next slide. So what is storytelling? Storytelling is simply the art of sharing experiences in a way that connects with people. It is facts and figures that are important, but stories also make people feel and take action. So stories are a way that we bring together the facts and figures with the emotions, and together those things then inspire people to take action, right? In climate work, stories make science real. They bring climate change down to people's lived experiences. We all know the science behind the climate crisis, right? We know about changing weather patterns. We know about the extreme weather events that we're having. We can explain the science behind it, especially for some of us who have worked in the climate space for a long time. We're familiar with the language and we're familiar with the jargon. But how we tell stories and how we make it real is by telling the stories of people who lost their homes during floods in KZN or the Eastern Cape. It's by telling the stories of people who have to migrate and leave their communities to go and live and find work in other communities because they've been displaced by a climate crisis. It's being able to tell the stories of women farmers on the continent who can no longer make a living from farming, right? Because the weather and the climate is changing, and so they're not able to yield crops the way that they used to. And so storytelling is really about connecting the science that we can all understand with the very real consequences that it has with everyday people on the ground. Next slide. I'm aware that people might be taking notes, so please let me know in the chat box if I'm moving too quickly. I am just very aware of time because we have about 5 speakers today, but I don't want to move too quickly. So please let me know if I'm moving at a pace that is not comfortable. Okay, I don't see any messages in the chat, so we're doing fine. Perfect. The importance of storytelling. For us, storytelling is about making sure that African voices are heard, which goes back to the point that we made earlier about the fact that Africans are the most affected by the climate crisis. However, probably we can get the presentations after, definitely. However, our voices are often missing from very key negotiation tables. And how we can counter that is to continue telling the stories of how the climate crisis is affecting our lives, but also to shine a spotlight on the work that we're doing to mitigate that. And that is how we make sure that we keep putting pressure on institutions, on key decision makers, to ensure that Africans, the lived realities of African people are at the negotiation table and that they inform the decisions and the climate policies that are formed. Our stories also highlight Indigenous knowledge, our resilience, and innovative solutions. Um, how many times have you heard someone saying, you know, if you live in an African home, you know about recycling because there are 1,000 ways in which we use plastics, for example, or we're able to find 1,000 uses for old clothes or for old boxes or for old material, right? And so Africans have indigenous knowledge and we've been resilient and innovative in terms of just taking care of our environment. And how we're able to pass down that indigenous knowledge is to continue to tell the stories, is to continue to write it down, because those things do get lost between generations and they do get lost in the cracks. And so by telling these stories, we're also able to influence global policy spaces like COP and to make sure that Africa isn't left out of global policy making as well as being left out of the narrative. Next slide. Why storytelling matters. Storytelling humanizes climate change, as we've mentioned. It puts a face and a voice to the crisis. It bridges the gap between science and society. And so it helps us make that connection between the science that we hear about, as well as how the science is actually driving real consequences in our communities. It inspires action, it counters misinformation, and it helps people learn in a way that they can relate to, right? And so when we tell stories of what is happening on the African continent and how we're affected by climate change, we're able to counter any misinformation, because we know that sometimes the stories that are told from the African continent do not represent the whole truth. And so by telling stories from our local communities, we're able to make sure that we're sharing accurate information because we live in the space. Okay, Sharon is saying I am a bit too fast. Thank you. I will try to slow down. Because we live in our communities, we interact with people in our communities. And so when we own the narrative, we're able to tell stories with a lot more truth. But also we help people learn. Earlier on, I mentioned that one of our campaigns is building the climate movement. And the goal of that campaign is to increase climate literacy levels on the continent. That is to increase people's understanding of what climate change is and what they can do to mitigate the consequences and the impacts of climate change in their communities. Because the language within the climate space can tend to be scientific, very exclusive. It can tend to be like very jargon heavy. When we move away from that a bit and we tell stories, we're able to teach people about what is happening in climate, without confusing them with very complicated language, right? Because we're able to teach them about climate in a way that they are able to relate to because everyone can connect to stories. And that is why we produce films, we produce animations. That is why we produce video content, because it's easier to connect to a human being, another human being, than just a text, for example, or a bar graph. Next slide. So looking at this practically, how do we tell stories, right? The first thing is to start with your intention. Why am I telling the story? It's very important to define the purpose, right? Am I trying to inform people about what is happening? Am I trying to inspire people by sharing someone else's story? Am I trying to inspire young people to take more action in their communities? Am I trying to persuade people to think a certain way or rally behind a particular cause, rally behind a particular policy position? Or am I merely just trying to connect people with the story and let people know that sometimes the experiences, the different contexts in which climate change affects us, right, might look different, but we're all connected by the same thing ultimately, right? Because climate affects all of us. And so it's very important to set your intention from the beginning. This also makes sure that as you are crafting the story, whether you're writing an article, you're producing a video, whatever content you have decided to produce, it ensures that this remains cohesive, right? That you're not losing your audience in the middle of the story because you're trying to do too many things at once, because you have started with the most important thing, which is to set your intention. The second thing to do is to know your audience, right? So who are you speaking to primarily? Yes, anyone can pick up your story, anyone can read your article, anyone can read your blog, anyone can see your short film, but primarily, who do you want this thing to speak to, and who do you want to be influenced by this piece of content or the story that you're producing, right? Are you speaking to policymakers? Are you trying to influence their decisions? Are you speaking to young people in your community to make them realize the responsibility that they have towards the environment? Are you speaking to the general public, right? Are you sharing facts and figures and trying to make people aware of the ways in which climate is changing? So it's very important to know who your primary audience is, because that will determine the tone that you use, but oftentimes it also determines the kind of content that you want to create, right? If you are trying to talk to a community in a village in KZN, for example, you may want to produce a story on the radio, because South Africans and Africans in general actually still consume a lot of their stories and a lot of their news using the radio. But if you're trying to connect with European audiences or young people young people beyond the African continent, you might want to consider more digital platforms, right? And so we see the ways in which being able to distinguish exactly who your audience is going to ensure that you're using the right platform, but that you're also using the right tone, because you know how to speak to the person you're speaking to. Excuse me. The next thing to do is to structure the story, right? The story needs to have a beginning, it needs to have a middle, and it needs to have an ending, right? The beginning is then your introduction of the story. So you're setting the scene, you're introducing the characters, you're introducing the numbers, you're introducing the thing that you're going to be telling us about, right? And then you have a middle where you are telling us now the bulk of the information. You are building the tension of your story. If there are conflicting messages that you want to bring people's attention to, this is where you would make both arguments, and this is where you would fit in all of your key messages, right? You also want to make it relatable. So if there is a way that in your key messages, you can make examples by drawing on everyday life, this is also where you're going to make your examples. This is also where you're going to bring in the elements of lived realities, right? You also want to show people and not just tell them. So use things that that speak to people's sensory. So describe sights, sounds, emotions, if these things are relevant to your story. Next slide, please. Make the story relatable. We spoke earlier about staying away from the jargon and the language. Sometimes we can't avoid it because we use the English language and we have terms for certain things. But if you can, stay away from jargon. If you can break down complex ideas into more simpler language, do that. And you can also make things more relatable by using real life examples, right? Familiar settings or emotions that people understand. For example, if you're telling a story about the COP conference, right? And I'm going to refer to last year's COP because that's the one I actually attended. Last year's COP, as some of you may know, was dubbed the finance COP, right? But a lot of people struggle to engage with climate finance as a topic. It can get very complicated. But what everyone understands is that we need money to deal with climate change, right? We need money to mitigate the impacts of climate change in communities, whether that money is going towards climate education programs, whether it's going to loss and damage, whether it's going to financing climate research, We need money, especially in the global south, in order to have strategies to mitigate climate change. So everyone understands that we need money, even though they may not understand climate finance terms. And so how do you marry those two things? By bringing the jargon and the big complicated language down to kind of a relatable scenario that everyone can understand. So where you can find a way to make the language less complicated and more simple, this is where you're trying to do that by making your story more relatable. And then keep it simple and clear. I think that we've spoken about this, and always end with a point or takeaway, right? And this is very, very important because this answers the why of your story. But most importantly, why should people care? So now you have told the story about how Africans need increased climate finance so that we can better mitigate climate change in our communities, so that we are able to address things like loss and damage. Why should people care? Because loss and damage affects infrastructure. It affects the way people are able to live their lives and to move forward after they've had a major climate event. That it's important for us to keep track of climate finance flows in our country so we make sure that they're reaching the communities that we want them to reach, right? This is where you're really trying to tell people why you're telling the story, but also why people should care. Why does it matter in the bigger context of things? Thanks, B. And then the 5 questions of storytelling are who, what, where, why, and when, right? And so every story, in order to be complete, needs to answer the following 5 questions. Who? So who are the main characters that are being spoken about here? What happened or what is happening? What is the key event or problem? Where? Setting the scene in terms of your location, time, and context. Why? Why does this story matter and why should people care? When? And this is when you're situating the story in time. So if you're writing a story about why young people should care about COP, are you talking about last year's COP? Are you talking about this year's COP? Are you talking about COP in general, right? And so you want to kind of anchor your story in a time frame. And how? So how did the events unfold? How did people respond? But most importantly, how do you want people to respond after you have told your story? Next slide, please, B. So I wanted us to do a little exercise. I'm not sure if you guys are able to read the story. If you can see the font, okay, I think it is visible. If you're able to read the story and maybe just will take like 5 minutes or 2 minutes. And in the chat box, if you are able to identify the 5 questions of storytelling. So what, who, when, why, and how in this short story. And if you could just answer it in the chat. Is that okay? Please give me a thumbs up. We'll just take a bit of time to read through. Okay, great. I'm seeing thumbs up. Wonderful. And keep it short. You don't have to write really long sentences. Someone is asking if we could zoom in a little bit. Someone in the chat says the who is Maguette. Or is it Maggie? Perhaps I'm pronouncing it incorrectly.
It's Margaret.
Margaret. Thank you. I'm just going to write my answer. Okay, so we have a few answers. Who? Marget. When? Age 15. Why? Getting young people involved. Where? Senegal. What? Climate change. That's a very nice summary. Problem, effects of climate change. What? Discovered the urgency of climate change. And early marriages. I really like that answer because it connects climate change to the issue of early marriages, which is a real life story that makes this text a bit more human and also relatable, like we discussed earlier. Okay. Call to action, youth should be more involved. Absolutely. Same to the political class. Sure. So I think what you can see also from this exercise is that people can interpret the questions differently. And so people might have a different answer for who, what, when, um, how, and why. But I'm glad that we were all able to kind of um, stay within the same place and have consensus on most of it. But different people can answer those 5 questions differently and respond differently to the same story. Next slide, B. B, next slide.
Sorry, Dee, I'm trying to move to the next slide. Just having a bit of technical issues. But,
Okay, no problem. No worries. But maybe while we wait for that next slide to load, now that you have an idea of what you need to tell a complete and compelling story, I do want us to shift a little bit and talk about how to use those tools to extract information that you need to put together a story when you're attending a climate conference or consultation, for example, like COP or Conference of the Parties. I know a lot of people don't get to attend COP, but some people do. And one of the things that people then want to do when they come back is to kind of reflect on the experience in a way that allows people who do not have access to that space to have an understanding of what was going on, what were the important moments, what were the important decisions that were being made, and also how are those decisions going to affect communities. And so we thought it was important just to have a short session on COP for some people who might have never attended, some people who will be attending for the first time, whether this year or in the years to come. And when you're attending these conferences, how are you then able to come back and reflect on those stories? But also, how do you prepare, right? So if you are going to be attending a big negotiation and you know that you want to write a reflective piece afterwards, what are some of the things that you can ask yourself before you even attend to make sure that when you are at this conference, you're able to extract the correct information and you're not getting kind of lost in the lights and just getting lost in the busyness and kind of just the overwhelming nature of some of these conferences. B, are we back?
not yet. Sorry.
Okay. No, that's perfectly fine. I think we can get started and just have a discussion about what is COP, right? So COP quite literally stands for Conference of the Parties, and it is the biggest climate decision-making space under the United Nations. Almost 200 countries come together every year to negotiate climate action at COP. It's not just governments, it's also a space for activists, for young people, NGOs, and for different people to bring their voices into that space. So when you're attending these conferences, how do you prepare stories? So first of all, it's easy to get lost in the policy language, like I mentioned. And so it's very important to remember the person and not the policy. So a lot of policies and a lot of decisions are going to be made. And it's then your responsibility to figure out, how does this affect the ordinary person in my community? And so if a decision is being made on how much money to give to a particular country or continent for climate change, and you decide that it's not enough, how is that very practically going to affect communities, right? It means communities have a smaller chance of kind of bouncing back from climate disasters. It means communities don't have a big enough loss and damage fund. It means we're not able to implement mitigation and adaptation projects, which means that the consequences or the impact of climate change is going to be felt longer. And so, as a storyteller, it is then your responsibility to find the person behind the policy and how the person's life is going to be affected. Because anyone can read about policy, right? If you go on the COP websites, all of the decisions that have been made ever since COP started, they are all on that website. The Paris Agreement on that website. But your job as a storyteller is to interpret how all of those decisions are going to reach and affect the person. Okay, we're back. So look for the human angle, use quotations to bring authenticity. So if there are some important speeches or important speakers who are going to take the platform, look for the quotations that really speak to the core of what they're talking about. You can also use this as a headline. It usually draws people in, or you can use it as your introduction, and then break it down and interpret it throughout your story. Connect the local to global. So show how the decisions that are being made at a global scale ultimately affects the local. And sometimes this might require a bit more research. It might require for you to have interviews with people that have a bit more of a technical background. Don't be afraid to do that. You don't have to have all the answers. Keep it short, keep it punchy, and always end with impact and, of course, a call to action. So these are just some headlines from articles that came back, some reflective articles post COP. And I wanted to give you an idea of how a lot of these articles actually don't have a human angle and how all of them then almost look the same. And you kind of are not drawn to read the story because there's no mention of the person, there's no mention of the community, there's no mention of that human aspect, except maybe the advancing gender equality one, because it speaks to gender equality, which is a reality in most of the communities we live in, right? But how it's important to make sure that there is a human voice behind the stories that we are telling. Also, a reminder that stories don't have to be articles. Stories take on a multitude of, they look differently, right? A multitude of, what's the word that I'm looking for? I'm forgetting the word. It's fine. But content looks different, especially now with digital platforms. A lot of people prefer to create audiovisual content. People write articles. You can create posts for social media, graphics. Stories can look very different. So you do not have to kind of limit yourself to just writing an article. Even podcasting, right, is a form of storytelling and packaging the stories that you want to share. We have come to the end of my presentation. I know that the last slide says Q&A, but I'm going to ask that you please hold on to your questions. We're going to have a Q&A session after this presentation. The next presentation, I believe, we will have a Q&A session, so you can just ask your questions all at once. Thank you for the hands and the hearts. I'm so glad to know that this was helpful to you, and very happy to answer your questions later on during our Q&A. B, if you could just load the second presentation. While you do, I am going to welcome our next speaker. As I mentioned, we are not hosting this by ourselves, but we have teamed up with other organizations in the space who do a really good job of telling climate stories. Our next speaker is Clinton Danderson, who is a climate reality leader and e-commerce digital engagement expert. He has a passion for sustainability and innovation, and he is the co-founder of the Aspire Climate Vanguard. The Aspire Climate Vanguard is a nonprofit that amplifies African-led climate solutions and advocacy. The organization works to empower climate champions and marginalized communities, bringing their voices to the front line of climate action and policy influence. ABC is dedicated to solving the silence by amplifying voices in climate advocacy and equipping young people with the skills and the tools to lead community-driven climate solutions. Clinton will be taking us through climate storytelling in the African context. Clinton, the stage is yours.
Thank you so much, Dimple. Thank you so much for that presentation. It was really, really insightful to say, and also getting to share the work the African branch of the Climate Reality Project is doing. I think you guys are doing an amazing work, and I'm so excited to be here. And just to say that a lot of what you've already shared in your presentation is just like you stole some of my notes, so I have to investigate that. Uh, and it just goes to tell that storytelling is just like it's the same principle. It's just for us to get to understand these principles, and we can. Oh, I'm seeing the emojis. Yes. And it's just for us to kind of understand these principles, and we can replicate it anywhere, even in any sector, but within the climate change space and sustainability, and even when we're trying to also build our personal profile. So I would try to be fast and not also repeat some of the things Dimple has already shared with us, because I believe this meeting is recorded, and even though some persons thought she was fast, I think even when you get to watch the recordings, you really understand in depth of most of what she shared. So once again, thank you for having me. And let's get started. I think it has already been established that this workshop is mainly trying to see how we are able to shape community voices leading to the COP. And also, you know, I think my presentation will also center around for those of us who are kind of new or just like an introductory level, trying to understand what storytelling is all about and how you can get started either through your organization or even as an individual to start amplifying the stories of people and issues within your community. So next slide, please.
Sorry. Our technology is showing us flames today. I will try and get us back.
Do you want me to share from my end?
Yes, please.
Okay, let me
While
try.
I try to fix this, thank you.
I think you need to give me like, okay. Oh, the moment. Okay. I don't know if my screen is visible.
Yes, we can see Clinton.
Okay, thank you. I can do
Can
it.
I ask you to just, yes, perfect. There we go.
Okay. Yeah, so okay. Yeah, so we'll be talking about climate storytelling in the African context. And before I begin, I would just like to, establish what storytelling is. I believe a lot of us understand the concept of storytelling, and I always like to say this whenever I'm given the opportunity to speak to, climate advocates and young people generally, that for me, my journey is quite funny because I really didn't have a lot of background, so to say. Like, I used to think that, storytelling is something that has to be like maybe something you studied academically and then you understand how to write. And but it's just about sharing your experience. And also, I believe that everyone here on this call has a story to tell. It's just trying to figure out how you want to start that and also what narrative you're trying to push. So, storytelling more recently have been used even on different serious issues around the world. And I won't mention them in specifics, but we've seen wars happening. We've seen how countries are, struggling to use storytelling to build, to gain, support from different audiences. And even in Africa, we've seen recently where I was sharing with someone where a coup happened, and then the government in place have been able to survive because they are trying to use storytelling to get audiences and people who have never even been there before, just to build solidarity, to build their emotions and all of that. So for a long time, why we now talk about storytelling in the African context is because for a very long time, the stories that have been going out from Africa wasn't, shaped by us. So if you even go back, in documentaries, you see that a lot of these stories were created from people who came into Africa to share their own experience for whatever purpose or reasons they wanted. So it's now very important for us to now build a strong narrative, what we're sharing, what we are telling about Africa, and what narrative we want to create. And for us as an organization, we looked at it that we just want to position Africa to be like a leader in the climate action movement. And those of us that are following our pages, you've seen like we've been able to promote the work young people are doing, position them as thought leaders, position their innovations, and solutions, and whatever little things they are creating, to see that we are not just like the victims, we are also creating solutions that can be adopted by, the community of nations. So stories are also not just to tell, also maybe just to build emotions. It has to be for a reason. And one of those reasons is that stories can be used as a tool for justice. And as we're also having this workshop, we're going to see how we're able to tell little stories, bring little stories to the forefront, in conferences, just like Dimple has shared, and like conferences like the COP. Yeah, so I'll go to the next slide. So why storytelling matters. Storytelling moves hearts before policies. And what this means is that there are a lot of, even in our countries, for example, in Nigeria, a country, you see that there are a lot of policies that we don't even know about, we don't care about. People don't want to start going through documents and reading, most of the times it's even uh, um, people within the legal practitioners that take a lot of time to read through all these words, long data sets and uh, lines, read through the lines. But you see, a lot of people don't really even care. They don't even know what policies are available in our countries, right? But so storytelling is just a way to simplify everything to every audience. We can think that audiences from will I say rural regions, or local communities who are not able to understand what is going up in the top, but they play a huge role in terms of making sure that those policies are effective. So we need to also make them understand what's going on, and we also need to understand it for ourselves, different age groups and children. And yeah, so this is where telling stories, breaking stories down come to play, right? So it turns data into human experience. Dimple has also shared a lot about that, trying to see that we personalize issues and make people see it from the lens which they can relate with. And also it shifts global narratives on Africa. A lot of times, especially most of the social media platforms, you see that there's some kind of posts that, and it's even funny that it's not just about, like, let's say most of the times when we talk about the global narratives, we think about it like the Western world or the global North, like we say, and all of that. But even within Africa, is a lot of narratives that are being shaped that a lot of Africans don't even know what's happening in the next country. And then we get to see this and like, wow. So it even, maybe it even snows in Africa. Sometimes there are so many basic informations that could be happening in neighboring African countries we are not even aware of. And that's why when I started off, I said everyone has a story. So even when you come out of your house and then the steps you take, if you're able to document that process and put it, someone would be really curious to be like, wow, oh, so this is even happening in Ghana. I didn't even know. So this is happening in Kenya. So why do we have to go the other way? And when we can just, go to the next country. So these narratives are very important because when we tell the stories, we are able to relate with that as Africans. Okay, I'll slow down a bit. Our work at ACV, we're doing a lot of work in media and storytelling, and we've been able to see how we use storytelling to amplify voices, and we do this in different ways. And one of the core projects we've done on storytelling, aside what we post on our platforms and the stories we share, is that we've been able to build a community, around storytelling by starting off the first African Climate Creative Fellowship Program. We just ended last month. So this program was focused on training the Africans on storytelling. And Dimple had mentioned like storytelling shouldn't just be about just writing articles. So we had the fellows learn on how to create podcasts, how to do short videos, how to write stories, and one other one. Yeah, so these are like core aspects of storytelling where we're able to use social media and various media platforms to be able to create this content. And so it was really an interesting session, and the fellows were hopefully very, very impacted by that training. And so, like I said, the whole idea around this is to see that policies and changes that are going to be made, they're going to come from real people who are able to share, because these voices, when we're training these fellows, we're able to use a trainer approach, which means that they can now go back to their community. They don't need to wait for big media platforms or whatever to share the stories. So if you build a community around African perspectives, a community around storytellers, it means that even if you don't have a big platform, but when you have that community, you're able to share your story, other people will take it up and then they're able to share it. And, by doing so, it's getting more attention and awareness to address so many issues that affect us. Yeah, so I would just move fast. Creatives are not just witnesses, change agents. So when we talk about storytelling, we're also talking about creativity. And so we're looking at creativity and climate, why it matters. So I believe that most of us who have basic knowledge, on the climate advocacy work, we understand that Africa, contributes least to the climate change, to the global warming, and also contributes least to the global figures in terms of emissions. So, but we're able to suffer most, and the basic reason why we're suffering is that we are not able to have the capacity to build infrastructures to adapt to these changes, just like the other rest of the world is doing. We are, looking like we have been isolated, even though we're not the cause of these issues. And when it comes to finance, when it comes to technology and transfer, when it comes to basic survival development, humanitarian aspects, we are still struggling to be able to see how we are able to adapt. So this causes a lot of issues for us. And so we need to start telling the stories, how this affects us. And yeah, so we need to humanize the crisis. And very importantly, not just like because we just want to tell stories, right? So why is it very important for us to humanize climate change? Is that climate change to us is one of the biggest issues facing our time, our generation. And this is like, I can say it's like for Africa is one of the biggest issues we're facing because it intersects with almost every area of our existence, not just economy, not just health, not just, a lot basic survival, right? So this is something that everyone, whatever is your career path, you're able to link it to how you're able to see that you create, you make your impact in this and adding your voice. So just talking about that, I created this because I want us to know that climate change, we're all aware of SDG goals, and this is like something most of us can relate to. So I created this to show us that climate change. So when we're talking about humanizing the effects of climate change and creating stories that we can relate with. So one of the simplest way to do this is to say that climate change is a factor that affects every single SDG, and a lot of about it this way, but when you talk about poverty, when you talk about hunger, well-being, education, so this intersects all of this. So if you're someone that want to start off, in storytelling and building a career, or yeah, because you can also build a career on storytelling. So if you're someone that wants to start off, telling stories and you're confused, so you can just go to the SDG goals and also look at the realities of your community, because you have to be speaking a voice. Either you're speaking a voice of a community, and something that is really, you think you can connect to the SDG goals, and then you break it down into simpler forms where when you talk about this, everyone can relate to this, and you're now linking it with a global vision. You see that it gets more easy for you. Okay, so sustaining a storytelling platform. Some of the lessons, we've learned a lot of lessons from our work, even though we also, a new organization are still growing. But with a little time, we've been able to focus on storytelling and media and all of this work. We've been able to see that, um, at a point it was like storytelling was just building momentum, and people are now getting to appreciate the importance of sharing these real life stories, and so some of the lessons we've learned is that is very build a community, not just content. You have to build a community because you're trying to relate with people. You don't have to see it like you're creating a content for a mass audience, right? You have to build a community of people who are in the same, uh, you know, not just work with you, but people who are also interested in the work you're doing, in the subject you're trying to amplify, and it also creates safe spaces for voices. So this means that for us, we've been able to build different platforms, even aside the bigger, maybe LinkedIn, we have platforms, in thousands on WhatsApp. We get to engage with our community members from time to time, and we get to have them share their thoughts, random conversations where we're able to see how we're able to support in different ways and support the programs and support what they're doing. So once you're able to build these communities, it's easier for you to build that momentum and get your stories heard, across various platforms. So yeah, so don't bother about being perfect. You can never be perfect. And I say that because algorithms and things are changing every day. So before you're even thinking of trying to be perfect, a particular model must have been changed. So just go out there, keep creating, keep sharing your stories in the most original way. There are, tools to aid your story, like now AI and all of that, but it's very good to understand how to use these platforms respectfully and responsibly to not take out the originality of the message you're trying to pass. But yeah, so consistency is better than perfection, and being consistent don't mean like you have to be doing different things. You can be consistently doing different things, and that's not really consistency. So you have to be consistently telling a particular type of story, sharing a particular type of issue, so people are able to now relate to what you're doing. And once you're focusing on impact, you see that with time you're able to get things going. So yeah, so okay, I'd mentioned the use of AI. So now we see that trends are changing, and one of the most difficult things for storytellers and everyone to understand is how to be able to change and adapt, especially with algorithms. Many times, the internet platforms and social media is a big deal now, right? And is where most of the stories end up. A lot of people don't really sit down to watch like the TV or maybe read the newspapers, but yes, people still do. But a lot of the stories we're gonna share, especially when we're starting off and with little fundings, could be that we are posting the stories on social media. And now the social media platforms we see that there is a very, very short-term attention span. So we have to understand this in everything we're doing. We don't have to start creating the area where people now create big, long videos are probably gone, right? Maybe you want to document a project, fine, but nobody has that time to start watching 4, 5, 6 minutes videos. And, especially if we're talking of the African context, people are worried about their data. They're worried. They don't even, most times people don't have that time to sit down and just watch long content. So now reimagine what you're creating. You have to see how you're able to capture your audience in the first 4 seconds. You have to see how you use AI tools, and to be able to create better content, so you don't spend a lot of time also creating just one content, from posts to reels to experiences you're going through. So you have to always keep that in mind, that whatever you think how beautiful it is, just make it short and relatable. Just a meme, and just a very 4 or 5 seconds post reels. They go a long way to tell the same story or make the same impact you're trying to create with 6 minutes. Yeah, I see Dimple had already talked about this, why I said she stole my my notes. So you need to always understand why is very important, because if you don't have your own story, if you don't have your own voice, even when you start up, okay, you still see that you're struggling, you keep struggling, you keep struggling. So you need to really have a deep thought of why you're telling the story. Are you just telling the story because you heard that um you can just share stories? Yes, it's good to share stories, but if you want to do this long term, in terms in terms of building a storytelling platform, you have to understand why you want to even start in the first place, and you have to know your audience. This sounds very simple, but they are the core of everything. It could take you like a whole month, a whole week, a whole day to just understand why, and you have to know what audience you want to target, and not just target, and what audience you want to amplify their voice. Are you just amplifying their voice because is this your voice? Are you just telling the stories because you think this is what these people want? Or are you truly saying that you're speaking on their behalf? Are you forcing people to transition to your own ideologies, or are you trying to push the realities of what's going on in the environment you wanna amplify, or you wanna share the stories? So you have to understand that a lot of times these stories you share should reflect the realities of what if it's not about you, if it's about a place, it has to reflect the reality of if this is what they want. You don't just go about telling stories that you think is the right thing to do. So you have to choose the right medium. Is this going to be, because when you now know your audience, you now have to know what medium, how you want to reach them, and you want to stay consistent with the messages you put out. So I've touched on this. Um, so I also had to, include some of the hard challenges, in your work. Especially when you're using storytelling to make impact, is not always glamorous. One of the most difficult aspects, I was discussing with some of community members, and every now and then we discuss, when we have challenges or whenever we just want to share ideas, and it's always good to break down. The climate change space is a very huge space. Even when you want to go into it as a career or as an advocate, you have to break it down. Okay, do I want to be like do I want to talk about finance? Do I want to talk about technology, innovation? Do I want to focus, on media, on storytelling? You have to understand. And then, and one of the um, challenging things I can say about storytelling is that it's very difficult to be able to express the impact you're making, or to even analyze it or measure the impacts you're making. Because you can tell a story that has like, it gets like 10,000 engagements, but does it translate to change? Does it translate to a policy change? Does it build momentum? Does it build community? Uh, 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 does it create the change? Because you don't just tell the stories and go, it has to translate to something, right? Does it spark up a conversation that leads to a policy change? Does it, go the way you want it to go, not just about people hearing it and then what next? So it's not always glamorous. It's very, very, you know, sometimes very challenging to see that the stories you're coming up with are actually making the kind of impact you want it to make. So funding can be inconsistent. Yes, so funding a lot of times is difficult to convince people that you want to get funding just to tell stories, and even when you get this funding, sometimes they want to make the stories suit what they want, right? And so please tap me if I'm going. I know I'll soon be rounding up. And so funding can be inconsistent. So you have to know. So once you understand your why, and I believe you're able to figure this out. And one of the ways to also figure this out is to reach out to, there are a lot of organizations working on storytelling now, and you can reach out to them. You can reach out to us. You can reach out to the ACROP. If you reach out to them, they can advise you on how to go about some of these things, and because sometimes you might not figure them out. So funding is an issue. You have to go to places. You have to really capture the stories. You have to be able to use tools to put out the stories and all of that. So another making an impact is that the work often speaks louder long term than the numbers today. So this is also what I mean by the impact, how to measure it. You can just be in the present and like, oh, but on the long run, you start seeing that a lot of the work you've done maybe 1 year ago, some months ago, are now picking up and now gaining more, and people can now go back to it. And it's always good to make sure that some of the stories are seen not just on social media. You're able to put out the stories on platforms that search engines can index, so that when people go and just search about this something that happened in Kenya, your story pops up, and then it goes a long way for people to now understand the work you've been doing over time. Next slide. Start creating for impact. Identify. Oh, did I? So yeah, we talked about this. Start a personal project. Share the process. Yeah. So yeah, share. I will just go to 4 because we've talked about the rest. Share the process, not just the results. It's important to share the process. So storytelling don't need to be. It's just like when you see movies behind the scenes, right? So the BTS shots sometimes they gain more or attention even than the finished work. These days, the audiences, especially on social media, they don't like to see finished, fine, clean work. They just feel like this is too arranged, right? So people want to see like unaware things, unaware videos. They want to see the process of the work you've done. Because they're going through a phase. They don't believe that it's so easy, right? So they want to also learn about the difficult aspects of how you got to where you are and how you came about this campaign, or how you came story. They want to see the process, not just the final work. So when you take them through that process, you're also not just, sharing behind the scene, you're building a community, you're building their interest, you're building their anticipation. They get to learn more about how you got to this point. And you know how sometimes if you notice, sometimes you see people maybe on your timeline, and then you've been following them for some time. It's just like you're not a part of them. You know a lot of the work they've been doing and how they got to this points, and be bold, be consistent. Yeah, I think we're rounding up soon. Okay. Final thoughts. Your story is your power. Impact isn't something we chase, it's something. Okay, so impact isn't something we chase, it's something we build. So what does creating for impacts, or does telling stories for impact mean to you? So like Dimple has said, I think there'll be time for questions and answers, and we'll be happy to share that with you. So thank you so much. I'll be here to get more of your thoughts and also engage further in the workshop.
You're on mute, Dee. No. No. We can't hear you now.
Let me take these off. Can you
Yeah.
hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. It must have been the headphones. Thank you so much for that in-depth and very comprehensive presentation, Clinton, just letting us in on the work that you're doing at Aspire Climate Vanguard, but also giving us insight into some of the things that you have seen audiences engage better with, right? It's very important for us to also kind of keep our fingers on the pulse when it comes to what kind of content audiences are consuming, how they want to consume the content, so that we are not creating content or creating stories that no one wants to see or engage with. So Clinton is still around for questions and answers. I know I had promised that we're going to have a short Q&A, but we are doing so badly on time. We are running behind time. And so I would like us to go into our third presentation, which is very practical. And I have a feeling that this is where a lot of the questions are going to come from. So with your permission, I'm going to ask that we go straight into the third presentation, and then I will extend the question and answer session after this presentation by Imani. So I'm just going to ask that whatever questions you may have, please write them down, leave them in the chat if you're scared that you're going to forget, so that we can come back to them. Thank you very much. I see the approval hearts. in the chat. But up next, I am so excited to welcome Imani Dlamini from Scene TV for a session on practical techniques for storytelling and editing for beginners. So Imani is a producer with over 5 years of experience at Scene Stories or Scene TV. She has worked on entrepreneurial and environmental shows that spotlight change makers. She produced First Person, which is a Snapchat docuseries filmed through spectacles, showcasing innovators tackling climate change in Kenya, South Africa, and beyond. Imani has also facilitated mobile journalism trainings from Johannesburg to Norway and has mentored a cohort of environmental storytellers. So I believe we're in very safe hands. And Imani, the floor is yours.
Hi, Dimple. Thank you so much for the introduction. And thank you so much for this opportunity. I'm super excited to be with you. This is such an incredible room and really I'm learning so much here. So this workshop is like, I'm taking notes as well as a storyteller. And also like the previous presenter, Clinton, I think he shared some incredible insights, which I think really echo throughout all our presentations as well. So thank you so much for that introduction, Dimple. So yeah, basically I'm from Scene. B, I'm gonna ask if you can please go to the next slide. But basically at Scene, we really focus a lot in human-centered storytelling. So I would summarize us as like a storytelling platform, media company. We partner with a lot of NGOs and charities and mission-driven organizations and help them share their stories, as well as empower people on the ground to share their own stories through mobile journalism, so training people how to share their stories. So we're really focused on short form storytelling as well, so on TikTok, on Instagram and Facebook, which is going to be the focus of the session. Really, the focus of the session is how to tell stories just using your phone. Like, you don't need big cameras. Big cameras are great, but right now, at the end of the session, you can go out in the field and share stories from your community. So I'm just going to share a little bit of examples of stories, and then we'll just share just 2 of these videos. They're very short, of just examples of climate storytelling that we've done at Scene, just to give you a taste of the kind of work that we do. So I'm going to ask B if you can please play the first 2 videos. Oh, I think you should have access. Let me grant you access. While I'm granting both the access, this is from the show First Person. That this is just a cut from First Person that Dimple mentioned, which was all about climate change and innovative solutions.
I found mountains made of hair across Africa. There's more hair here. All of it is made of plastic. Let me explain. Many African women wear weaves and wigs, and while the expensive ones are made of human hair from places like Brazil and India, most women wear cheaper wigs made of plastic. The problem with plastic hair is that it gets thrown away every 3 weeks, and that creates mountains of plastic hair landfills. This entire dump site looks like it's made out of plastic bags and hair. This stuff can't be recycled. It doesn't go anywhere. Are you not worried that it's gonna fill up the dump with all of this plastic? Not really. But this woman came up with an amazing solution. She turns plants into wigs. Your hair is made out of this?
Yes, it is this.
No way.
I'm going to show you how I make my hair. We start with sisal. Now it's time for crushing sisal.
It's finally starting to look like hair.
After crushing, I came out with the sisal fiber, which is very plain white. I dyed the sisal. After washing it, I oil it. After oiling, I pack, then the bread will be ready for the market.
And because they're totally biodegradable, your cow can eat your hair when you throw it away. She is Scene. Are you?
All right, thank you so much for sharing that. And just for a little bit of context, I'm sure you gathered from the video, there is a longer version which you can watch online, but basically, you know, plastic is such a huge issue. And as someone who likes to wear braids, the story really got me thinking about like the impact, the fact that my hair extensions are going to the, the landfill. But yeah, we really enjoyed working with that creator. Next video, please. I think, let me see if you have access. Let me grant that to you. This video is also from first person, and you'll see the context. It explains everything. So I'll just let you play that.
This guy is turning urine into bricks, and it's a world first. Urine! How does he make bricks out of pee? Why does he do it? And does it smell?
I kind of want to smell it, but I don't want to smell it. It smells like fish.
Normal bricks are bad for the planet because you need to bake them in a hot oven. But the urine bricks do not need an oven. It's made at room temperature, so it's better for the planet. First, he collects urine from the toilet.
Okay, so this is it?
You need about 200 people's urine to make one brick.
Oh, this is next level gross.
Just watch your shoe, eh?
No, it's on my shoes.
Then he mixes the urine with sand and a special bacteria, and the result is a brick that is stronger than normal bricks.
It might disgust you, but I believe it has the potential to save the planet.
He is seen. Are you?
All right. Thank you so much for that, Bertha. May you please go to the next slide? Okay, so basically this session, we're just going to be talking about effective storytelling techniques and editing for beginners. We'll just go through like some tools that you can use. Next slide, please. Just an overview of what we're going to cover. We're going to go into an introduction of Mojo, which is mobile journalism. So that's really the focus of the session. And then we'll go into a little bit about what makes a good story, what to look out for, like how do you craft the story itself? What are the angles? How do you script it? And then we'll discuss a little bit about filming and editing, just a few tips as you go out into the field. And then lastly, we'll go into social media and utilizing that to get the most reach. Next slide, please. All right, so I'm going to just, for the next minute, I'm going to hand the mic over to you. So in the chat, if you can just please share, so you've already introduced yourself a little bit, but I would love to hear just what climate story are you excited to share? Maybe you might already have ideas of like the kind of stories that you would want to share in your community, or stories that you've seen recently that you would thought you were cool, or even now on the spot, you can just brainstorm. So I'd love to just in one line in the chat, just share your name, the kind of stories, climate stories that you want to be sharing. And then hopefully you get to do that after the session. And then I'm also going to just ask for a volunteer as well, if they can share that as well. So are there any takers who just want to share like a climate story that you're excited to share? All right, I see some people in the chat, which is really awesome. I see Karen said, this is very personal because I have hair extensions. Yep. Totally relatable. I have a bag too. E-waste, climate justice, amazing. Energy poverty, e-waste, amazing. That's really awesome. Would anyone like to volunteer and speak out to unmute? Opening up the floor. Okay, no, yeah, okay, I see there's a hand up.
I think it's Abdu.
Oh yes, Abdu, yes, love to hear. So what kind of climate story are you excited to share?
Yes, how you doing, guys? I'm Abdu Bite from the Gambia, West Africa. I am a administrative personnel and a business consultant that is transitioning to a sustainability consultant. My drive for climate change is actually through infrastructure development, because I was mainly interested in infrastructural development and enhancement of the African continent and obviously my country, Gambia. So when I got introduced to climate change, it gave me the knowledge of the relationship of climate change and business activities. As a business personnel, I realized the limited standards that we have in Africa and how we have a lot of informal markets, I realized taking climate action could actually push us to actually adopt and give us some market standards in the business environment. So I decided to take up sustainability in the business environment and encouraging businesses to actually commit to climate action in decarbonizing and identifying what their greenhouse gas emissions are and taking account of ESG analysis and things like that. So this is the approach I am taking. I'm actually currently in the process. I have actually set up a consultancy firm and building up with some partners. It's a challenge for now because the majority of our businesses are with the mindset that Africa does not contribute, so we are not responsible. But I see the benefit of us contributing to climate action and in the transition by familiarizing with the environmental standards and regulations and policies. And I believe it's a step towards African development and also establishing firm standards for the African continent.
It's amazing. Thank you so much, Abdu, for sharing that. And I love how you brought up the importance of the intersections between climate and business and how we need business involved. So that's really powerful. Thank you so much for that. Okay, next slide. All right, so we spoke, I said that we're going to be talking about Mojo, mobile journalism. Basically, the way, the metaphor that we like to use at Scene is that your mobile phone, like no matter what phone you have, guys, like it can be an Android, iPhone, whatever, if it has a camera and you're able to record sound, it's like having a Ferrari in your pocket. Like the same way that a Ferrari is like an incredible car, it's like super fast and fancy, like your phone can do the same thing. So mobile journalism is essentially storytelling using your phone. You're creating it on your phone for mobile devices. It's often solo storytelling. So like, you know, you can feature one character and share their story or even share your own story. It's up close, it's personal, it's on the move. Like you can literally go to any event. Like let's say you're going to a protest or a gathering, or like if you're at COP, for instance, or any other platform, your mobile phone is so powerful. Like you can literally just be like there with your camera prepared and on the go, being able to do interviews on the go, obviously preparing, which we'll go into that a little bit. And it's essentially just making sure you're creating content on the go, on the move, and it's optimized for social and digital platforms. So you can cover really any story with your phone. So before we go into kind of, you know, going out there and filming, you need to think about the kind of stories that you need to tell, right? In the earlier presentation, we spoke a little bit about like, you know, impact and the importance of that. And for us, you know, or for a lot of you, the work that you're doing is super important and you want as many people to hear about it. Like you want as many eyes on your videos as possible. This isn't just about going viral for the sake of going viral. It's about actually having an impact. Next slide, please. So I'm going to use the term viral in this case, but not viral in the sense of like for the sake of it, but viral for a good cause. And here at Scene, we like to ask ourselves 3 questions when we think about producing for mobile. Is it visual? Is it debatable? And do people care? So basically, not every story is going to be a good mobile journalism story. Like there's some stories that are just better written. Like print is amazing. It's an amazing tool. Radio, Dimple spoke about this earlier. Like the majority of people in Africa and South Africa, for example, like listen to the radio. So like there's just some stories that should be on radio, but there's some stories that work on visual as well, depending on your audience. Is it debatable? Basically, it just means, is it something that people are talking about? Is there some debates? Is it a little bit contentious, a little bit controversial? And then lastly is, do people care? Like, is this relatable? Does your audience care? So before we go on to the next, so in the chat, I'm just going to ask just to share your thoughts on the story that we just watched. So we watched the story about the plastic hair, and I want you to just put in the chat if you agree that this story meets those criteria. Just quick bullet points, like for visual, yes or no. Debatable, yes or no. Do people care, yes or no? And just in one line, just say why. I'll invite you to do that in the chat. Whilst I ask Bertha, if you can please go to the next slide. So this was a pretty simple exercise, but I do want to hear in the chat as we go on if there's anyone who does disagree with this. But I think, clearly, this is super visual, like you're out there on the field. You're able to see the process of our character making the hair extensions out of sisal, this plant. Is it debatable? It's something that people are talking about. An earlier participant in the presentation in the chat, sorry, I didn't catch your name, but you spoke about how you also have a bag of hair extensions and you feel bad throwing it away. And like, we know, we care about the planet. So it is controversial a little bit, right? And then do people care, right? It's relatable to a lot of people who wear hair extensions or who just care about plastic. Next slide, please. All right. So before we go out and we film our own stories, it's important to think about what makes a good story. Not every story is great, or rather not every, you need to really think critically about your story and really like when you're planning. And this is something that was touched on earlier, but in the more practical sense of like what makes a good story, when you're thinking about it, there's 4 key elements I would like you to take from this. Next slide, please. All right, 4 key elements, right? 4 key ideas: story arc, suspense, climax, and resolution. Next slide, please. So when we say story arc, we're basically saying it has a beginning and a middle and an end. And this is something that Dimple alluded to in her presentation. Every story, there's a path. If you watch any movie, any of our favorite movies, like, I don't know, Harry Potter, I don't know why that was the first example. There's so many other great movies, but that has a clear path, right? So it's really important that you're using the same principles when you're thinking about your story. The second key element is suspense. Now, suspense is like the tension around the incident or event that's going to make people want to watch for longer. Because when you're writing your story or telling a story, you don't want to give everything away. Like, you need people to keep watching. Like, that's just how it is, right? You want people to be engaged. You want them to be curious. So maybe in your story, you can start your story with a question. And then the story can build out and you can answer the question. But you don't want to give things away. You want to create a little bit of mystery and intrigue so that people can watch longer. The other element is climax. So this is really kind of just like the most like intense part of the story, or the part of the story where the conflict or the problem or the plot is resolved. For example, if it's like a fairy tale, let's say the princess was captured by dragons, and then the hero saves the princess. He discovers the treasure, or she discovers the treasure and slays the dragon, and like things are resolved. And then the final part of your story is the resolution. So that's the ending or conclusion. At this part, hopefully the questions that you posed at the beginning are also answered as well. Next slide, please. So this is just a helpful diagram to like how to think about this. And this is quite helpful to have as well. Like, maybe have it somewhere posted in your room or something like that when you're thinking about your story. So you can see really here the beginning, and this is like setting up like what's happening. Like, there was an oil spill in the ocean. Maybe that can be your inciting incident, right? And then the rising action and the climax is like, okay, how are people responding it? Were they successful? And then the resolution is how the story ended. Next slide, please. All right, so we've gone into a little bit about what makes a viral video and the key elements that you need in your story. Now you actually need to also like select your story. But there's really a core difference between your topic and an angle. It's super important that when you are doing your stories that you are getting as specific as possible. So we like to think of, for example, climate change. You know, climate change can be a topic that you are all passionate about telling. But what about climate change? Like, climate change is such a broad topic. Like, are you talking about climate change and food security, climate change and health and things like that? So we like to use the analogy of the topic being an onion. And then when you cut an onion, there's layers, and like, you know, each of the layers are the different angles you can take. So it's being as specific as you can as possible. You can't tackle every angle, right? But you can tackle, like, you can't tackle every angle at the same time, but you can tackle one at a time. And Shrek reminded us of this very eloquently as well. Next slide, please. All right, so just 3 key steps to choosing an angle. Firstly, and it helps to take out a piece of paper as well when you're doing this in brainstorming, right? You start big, like the big picture. So it's climate change. Like all of us, we want to tell stories about climate change and how it impacts our communities or whatever it is. And then when you're brainstorming, look at subtopics around that, such as food, health, education, youth, and gender. And then try and like, you know, really focus in on those subtopics. So you're starting big and then you're zooming in until you have like a layer, just like our onion analogy. All right, and then just a little checklist. I know there's a lot to think about when we are thinking about stories, but I really want you to think about, you know, some of these things in a checklist, and you can build your own checklist. This is not like the only checklist that you can have, but these are good things to think about. Like, ask people, like, ask yourself when you're going out, is this story going to provide value to the person who is watching? Is it going to update them on something? Is it informing them? Is it putting perspective? Is it inspiring them? Is it entertaining them? So these are just some kind of things to think about. But of course, you know, as storytellers, you can also build out your own checklists and systems based on the goals of your organization. All right, so I'm going to open it up to the floor for another minute as well in the chat, please. If you can just share an example of a climate story angle that you've seen or thought about recently. Some of you have actually already done this. We did, you know, in the introduction, I did, you know, for example, Abdo, you seem to have like a really clear, like specific angle of stories, but I'm just going to open it up to the floor again in the chat. You're welcome to share, and I will be going through that as the session goes on. So yeah, you're welcome to share that in the chat. It's amazing. All right, next slide, please. Okay, so we've covered viral video formula, right? Like, what are the criteria we need in our stories? What makes a good story, right? So it's having a story arc, a beginning, a middle, end, climax, a suspense, and a resolution. And also thinking a lot about the importance of visuals in our story and having a clear angle. Now, a really important element is casting, because a lot of the time when you're telling mobile stories or any kind of stories, there's people behind those stories. Remember, we're not telling stories about data and numbers. That's not the only focus. It's really about the humans behind those numbers. And so who are these humans in your story? So when you're thinking about your story and casting and who the human faces are, a few things that are important to think about when we talk about mobile journalism is asking yourself, like, are they good on camera? You know, are they able to articulate the story or idea that you want to get across? because, you know, the nature of social media and video is that you really need to get people's attention. So it's really important to think about your casting and making sure you're having the right characters for the story that you're trying to tell. So are they good on camera? Are they charismatic? Do they fit the demographic that you were trying to reach? Now, all of us might have different target audiences, but for example, if your target audience is 18 to 21-year-olds, it's helpful to have young characters when you're telling your stories. If your demographic is like people in their 50s, it helps to have characters who are in that age demographic, for example. With Scene TV, our main audience for our channels is young people, like Gen Zs, like 13-year-olds. So we always ask ourselves, like, okay, is this story something a 13-year-old, a teenager is going to care about? How can I make it engaging for them? So it's really thinking about your audience and how your characters fits into that. And then finally, I mean, this is something that's going to always be throughout any medium you use. Does the story have suspense, story arc, climax, and a resolution? Next slide, please. All right, so I know I've flown through quite a lot, but now you've got an idea of the kind of stories that you'd want to tell, right? By now, maybe you've got an idea like, okay, I want to tell a story about climate change and how it impacts food security in Limpopo or in Kenya or a specific region. And you've got your angle, you've got your character. Maybe at this point, you've decided who exactly you're going to interview. It's super important now to script your story. Now, scripting is basically something you can do before you go out and shoot. It helps to plan. And then it's also something you'll do afterwards as well. But like, it's super important to plan. Like, I think planning and mapping out your story on paper or in your head is super important before you go out to film, because then you can actually get the best results, and things can change. You can obviously change things when you're editing, but planning is super important. And the core thing about scripting is starting strong. Have you ever been on TikTok or Instagram or whatever social media platform, and like, the creator opens up with something super shocking and it just stops you in your tracks? That's what you need to do. So we like to use this term called hooks, because you need to pull the people in. Like, people's attention span is like 3 seconds. So you need to start with something super strong that will hook people in. For example, there's different ways of doing this. For example, you can start with a really shocking number. For example, I came across the stat from Greenpeace that says that air pollution kills 42,000 South Africans in a year. That's crazy. I don't know about you, but for me personally, I was like, that's insane. Like that, the air we breathe is so toxic. So that's a strong hook, an example of a hook that you could use in your stories. Or you can open up your story with a question. For example, could you live on just 10 liters of water a day? This community does. You can open up with something surprising, like this city almost ran out of water. Or you can use something more visual and emotional. For example, someone can share a story of, losing their baby during a heat wave, because we know climate change affects maternal health as well. So there's different ways or formulas that you can start your story. It's good to think about it before, but when you're editing, you might also find that, oh, okay, the person that I interviewed said something really great, I should start it with that. So these are just a couple examples about of hooks. I'm going to ask Bertha, if you can please play. Let's start with the shocking number. Actually, these are all very short, so we can play all of them. Hopefully you have access. Oops. Let me grant you access. Okay, you should have access to that one.
More people were shot and killed in the Western Cape in a single week, and this is what makes it one of the most dangerous places in the world.
Have you seen the world's strongest woman?
Let's see if that's one. Okay, I think that one is similar to the urine. This is the same as the urine one. So for the sake of time, we can skip that one. But just for the first two videos, I'm going to open up a volunteer just to briefly just share, like, you know, let's start with the first. Which of the hooks stood out to you most, and why? Just in like 5 seconds, I'd love to just hear from someone in the group, just their thoughts on those hooks. If anyone would like to volunteer. Okay, going once. All right, I see in the chat 52. Yep, that is quite shocking. Yeah. All right, okay. I'll go into the next slide, but if you have any questions on this section, we can address that in the Q&A. All right, so structuring your script, right? So we've spoken about how important it is in your script to start strong. I would say, honestly, the beginning is the most important part of your script. Everything else you can kind of just flesh that in. So this structure of 5 parts is super helpful to think about. So part 1, as we've discussed, is starting with a hook. This is your beginning. This is the part that's going to grab your viewer's attention. Obviously, you want to be mindful of like not being like too clickbaity, but you do want to create some kind of suspense. For example, I survive on just 10 liters of water a day, and create that curiosity. The second part of your script is setting the scene. So just as we spoke about before in the story arc, and we want to set the scene and give people an idea of what the story is about, like where your character is from. Like if you're featuring a young girl, like we want to learn more about her life. Like what is her life like, The third part of your script is showing the challenge. For example, if we're sharing the story of this young girl who survives on so little water a day, we want to show that challenge as well. For example, she can tell us like, there's no rain. They don't come like they used to. Sometimes we don't have a drop of rain. And then the fourth element is the turning point. So this is kind of when things start to change. So maybe this is a hopeful story of like this young girl, they're running out of water, but the community has found a solution. So for example, our community, they've built these rainwater tanks and they've taught us how to store water, for example. And then the conclusion, which is the end. So usually it's really nice to end off with impact if that's the kind of story you're telling. For example, now because we had this problem, we now have solved it and we have enough water for school and so forth. I'm just really simplifying it, but basically a way of structuring a script is just starting with a strong hook, setting the scene, learning more about your character, the challenge that they're facing, the turning point, and then ending with the impact. Just another thing just to touch on here on the scripting as well, is that a lot of us here might be involved in activism as well. So it's good to end with a call to action, of like, what should you do? Like empowering your viewer to watch or to take action. So if you're telling a story about, plastic pollution and how terrible it is, the call to action can be like, okay, but you have the power to do that, share this video, or share your perspective. So that's super helpful. And then also visuals. Okay, so I'm going to go into filming, but this storyboard is a tool that really helps us to plan the kind of visuals that we are going to record. You can just go out there and film, but the best practice is planning, like planning. Planning will really make you make the best video that you can, so that when you're in the field, you're prepared. So it helps to, you know, map out or sketch out or even just write down the kind of shots that you want before you go out to film. And then that will also help you decide, really, is this a good mojo or mobile journalism story or not? Next slide. All right. Okay. So now we're at the part. So now we're filming. Okay. So just a few basics with filming. And I'm going to ask the team just to give me a heads up if I'm running on time. But just the key things to think about when you're out there filming. Remember, I mentioned that your phone is like a Ferrari, like you can do so much on it. And one thing that I would encourage is to just practice, like get as much practice as you can. But when you are ready to film and going out in the field, this is not in the slide, but I just thought that it's really important to make sure your phone is fully charged. You have enough battery storage and you have like some kind of power if you're going to be out there recording. But that's just a practical thing. But four key things to bear in mind when filming is lighting. You want to make sure that you have good lighting. Natural lighting is really great. You know, like a window and things like that. You want to avoid filming with a strong light behind your subject. So like if there's a window behind me, sometimes there can be a bit of a glare. So you just want to make sure you have good lighting. You can use extra lighting tools as well if you have like a ring light or anything like that. Sound. So lighting, number one, sound. Quiet location is best. It's always best to like get the best sound you can. There's things you can fix when you're editing, but sound is hard to fix. So please make sure that, you know, you're getting the best sound you can. If you need extra reinforcements, you can use an earphone mic. You know, it doesn't have to be expensive. If you want to invest in other tools, there's so many online that you can invest in to you know. Our co-founder Yusuf has a whole thing about like different tools you can get, but at the bare basics, really just your phone and just using it well and positioning it well will help you, and just standing close to your subject as well. It helps, and getting them to speak loud as well is something I also had to learn, like, because it's awkward saying like, please speak louder, but you have to do it. Third thing to look at is framing and stability. So basically framing is simply put like what your picture looks like. I'm explaining it in like, no, the filmmakers would be like, what? But basically it's kind of like how your picture looks. So we like to think of this rule of thirds concepts. And it's this idea, as you can see in the image here, there's this woman, this is from a movie. You can see that her eyes are kind of like near the top third of this grid. So that's, you know, that's a really good rule to think about when you're framing your subjects as well. And then also stability, like make sure your camera is as steady as possible. So if you're using your hand, you can totally do that, but just be as stable as you can, or you can rest your phone on a surface, or you can use a tripod. Like, you know, you can invest in a tripod or a selfie stick. I use a selfie stick as well. So you can like use tools around you to help that. And then the fourth thing, really important thing to think about is B-roll. B-roll is really just the extra footage that you see. So if you watch a documentary or some kind of film, you don't just have people talking. Sometimes you'll have people talking and then you'll have visuals like over the people talking. So that's what we mean by B-roll. So make sure that you're capturing extra footage that can give people more context as to what your story is about. For example, if you're sharing a story about the girl whose community has run out of water and they're building they're installing water tanks, you know, B-roll can be videos of her getting water and they're building this thing and things like that. There's different types of shots that you can film in your B-roll. Next slide, please. These are just 3 basic shots that it's really good to have in your filming. As you practice more and become like more advanced, there's so many different like other ways of like getting really cool B-roll. But I really want you to make sure you're capturing a wide shot. So this is kind of like setting the scene. So I've got my phone here. So if you're filming landscape or vertical, setting the scene. So your subject is standing in front of you there, record her in her house or outside her house or whatever. The medium shot, you're slightly closer to the subject. Maybe they're doing something like they're cooking or they're, I don't know, climbing a tree. And then your close-up is when you get a little bit closer and you can get like details, like their emotion. Or if it's someone doing something with their hands, a close-up can get that as well. And don't be shy to move closer to your subject as well. And then once you have filmed everything, it's time to edit. So basically, editing is kind of where the magic happens, because all the amazing work that you've done to film, to do your interviews and all of that, you get to put it together. And the core principle of editing is just, selecting your shots, putting them in the order that you want. If you have a script can really help you with the editing. And if you prepare well as well, like editing can be like super easy and seamless. You can add B-roll, you can add music, you can add all the really cool, like fancy tools to your toolkit. So with editing, there's a couple of tools online that are like free to use. There are paid ones as well, but these are some that I would, if you're new to editing on your phone, that I would suggest you check out. So CapCut, that's pretty like well, a lot of people use that for TikTok and Reels. There's templates on CapCut as well. So depending on what you're making, you can just use a template. But you can really do some really great edits for mobile as well on CapCut. All right, Sharon, I'm a bit too fast. Okay, thank you so much for the heads up. And then InShot. InShot is really great as well, another free tool. You can find these on Android and Apple as well. And then iMovie, which is on iOS. And this is also really great if you use an iPhone. I actually when I started out making videos before I started working at Scene, I used to just create videos and make them on my phone and edit on iMovie and post them on YouTube. And I was telling stories about like, sustainability and things like that for free. And it didn't cost me much except for transport, of course, but it just goes to show that you can use these tools to create content and stories. And then finally, you can also look into the tools within your social media platform. So TikTok and Instagram, they have editing tools as well that you can use. All right, so just to like wrap up a little bit, now you've done all the hard work, you've thought about your story, you filmed it, you've edited it. Now it's time to distribute it. Because remember we mentioned earlier that we want people to watch our stories. We kind of want to go viral, but with a purpose. And one way of thinking about it is, there's so much content. Everybody's a content creator. Like everyone's making content. Like, it's a really important, it's actually a really good skill to have to be able to tell stories no matter what industry you do. But you need people to see it. And it's good we like to think of the internet as a party or a crowded room, like a super crowded room. Everybody's trying to get your attention. So you need to grab people's attention and your content needs to be discoverable, meaning people can see it. There's a couple tools that you can put in your toolkit to help that. Firstly is having great stories, but also like when you're putting your stories out there, like making sure that you're using keywords and hashtags. So if you're posting something on Instagram, your caption, you can put a little description of your of your story, and use relevant hashtags and keywords so that people who are searching online can find your content. Using titles and visuals, for example, thumbnails. You might see on Instagram, like different creators have thumbnails, or even on YouTube, the images and big, bold images. So that's super important. At Scene, we actually spend a lot of time on thumbnails because that's like really key for engagement. Clear captions and subtitles. In your videos themselves, you can add captions, and I would highly recommend you do that, subtitles, because apparently a lot of people don't actually listen to the audio. I don't sometimes. Sometimes I'm watching a video and I just, I'm watching and I see the captions. So add captions, and it makes it more accessible as well to everyone as well. And then engagement and sharing, share your stories on as many platforms as possible. Encourage your audience to share, engage with people in the comments. And yeah, these are kind of the tools that you can, in your toolkit, that you can use. Next slide, please. All right, so just a final word, the thumbnails. Super important, because it's like you've done all this hard work, and thumbnails can be such a great tool to like advertise your story. It's almost like the magazine cover of your story. So for example, the story that we watched earlier with the urine into bricks, Yusuf, our co-founder who hosted the show, we took a picture of him sniffing the thumbnail because we were like, you know what, let's have fun with it. So you can really have fun with your thumbnails and take pictures that reflect your story. It helps to also make sure your thumbnails have action in them as well. So if you're doing a story where someone is making something, it helps to have that in the thumbnail. And finally, just the importance of thumbnails. Mr. Beast, I don't know if you're familiar with the YouTuber. Apparently he has a whole team and they just do thumbnails. They literally test out different thumbnails, and he's like a huge YouTuber. He's got millions of subscribers. So yeah, anyway, just goes to show the importance of thumbnails. And just to recap the session, think about the key takeaways I want you to think about is viral video. Ask yourself, is this visual, debatable, relatable? Having a story arc, focusing on an angle, having a strong hook, using characters and visuals, and making sure it's short and shareable. And also, obviously, the important thing besides, we want views, but impact is at the heart of the work that you all do. So yeah, thank you so much for your time and for the space.
Thank you so much for that, Imani, and for holding it down for 40 minutes. Imani's session was the longest out of all of us because her session, we tasked her with the very difficult task of doing the more practical elements of how to put a story together, particularly using a cell phone, which we know that most of us here in the room have access to. So thank you very, very much, Imani. That was so insightful and so comprehensive. And to the people who've been asking, yes, we will be sharing the presentation, so you will have access to all of this material. There's also been a question I see in the comments about whether or not you'll be receiving a certificate of attendance. So we actually didn't plan to give out certificates because it's our first time facilitating something of this nature, and we weren't really sure how it was going to go. But now that there is an interest, I think we will have a discussion with the team and we will see what we can do. No promises, but it's definitely something that we will put forward. And in our follow-up email, it is something that we will make mention of. So we are almost back on time. We're about 5 minutes behind time, which I think is not too bad considering all of the information that we've had to go through. So we are going to go into a slight body break. I mentioned that ACRP is big on producing films as a way of storytelling. So I wanted to show that to you practically. This is one of our films. It's called African Voices for Africa's Forests, and it spotlights one of our climate reality leaders from Cameroon, who is working with women in her community to save forests. This is also going to be our body break for about 10 minutes. Then when we come back, we will have our Q&A session. And then after that, we will have the final 2 presentations, and hopefully we will be ready to wrap up at 4 p.m. Is that fine? Can I get a thumbs up to see that everyone is on board with that? So no, we don't have certificates, Bakali, at the end of the webinar. As I mentioned, it's not something we planned for, but we do have the details of everyone who is logged on. So in our follow-up email, we will just let you know what the way forward with regards to that is. Okay, cool. B, I think we can press play on.
Have been made of a place in the society. I realized that of our environment, we are actually taking care of ourselves. Here in the nursery, we are going to nurse the seeds of diverse trees, and when the trees have grown up, we will then distribute them to communities so that they can continue in landscape restoration and also to conquer deforestation. For the Congo community, this is one of the livelihood projects. We had this demonstration hive so they could rear their own snails. When I'm too stressed up, I come to the beach to connect with nature. The work is exhausting. It takes off all your energy. What really helps me is the drive I have If I decide to give up, who is going to do it? Environment. That's very nice. They were timid. I am that person that has to stand up and speak to the people and speak also for the people. My target has been the House of Assembly, the Ministry of Education, the Ministry of Forestry, and the Ministry of Environment in Cameroon. I want those ministries to see the work I am doing and recognize it and be able to push it forward by bringing the voices of these rural people to the places where they are supposed to be.
I guess it is very fine.
Wow, thank you so much for playing that for us, B. And I do apologize. I know that the sound and the video were not necessarily aligned. I know that there were some times where she would speak and then the sound would come later. I just think that's the Zoom technicality. But as I mentioned, all of that work is up on our YouTube channel. It is free for you to access, either to watch it yourself, or even for you to use it in some of the workshops that you also want to facilitate in your community on the power of storytelling and showcasing the power of storytelling in fighting climate change. We're going to go straight into our Q&A. And I'm going to try to keep it at 10 minutes. I believe we still have all of our speakers on the line. And so everyone should be able to answer questions from the 3 previous presentations. And so if there are any really burning questions, please do show us by lifting your hand, and then we'll give you an opportunity to unmic yourself and ask a question or make a contribution. What really stood out for me that Ewi mentioned while we wait for people to come up to the podium is, you know, when she says, if I don't do it, who is going to do it? And oftentimes I think that that's the pressure that we feel as activists, as people who work in this space, as people who understand kind of the weight of the climate emergency. And we feel like if we don't take action, then no one is going to take action. And it's going to be too late. And that's also part of the reason why we create platforms like this at ACRP, so you can meet other people from across the continent, across the world, who are doing similar work, who are like-minded, so that we can lean on each other and we don't have to feel like we have to do all of the work by ourselves. Can you please drop the link to the channel? We'll do so. We'll also drop the exact link to Ewi's film. Okay, it seems we don't have any questions so far. I don't see any hands. B, unless I'm missing something. B and Salome, can you help me? Okay, I see a hand. I see one
There's
hand.
one right now, yeah.
Okay. Okay, I can't see the name of the person whose hand is raised, unfortunately.
Oh, it's
so whoever
Abdu.
You can fire away.
Yes, I don't actually have a question, but I would like to suggest, I've seen some couple of questions that ask for a certificate. I would like to suggest that you guys do consider giving them a certificate, because I have been in the media before, and going through the presentation, it was actually a very authentic and very insightful presentation that is, I see as a whole production course, and I think it would be very great to give people a certificate of attendance.
Sure. Thanks for that,
That was
Abdu.
a suggestion.
Sure.
Yeah,
Thanks for that, Abdu. Yeah, we will definitely have a conversation about it as the team. As I mentioned, it's not something that we had thought about before the webinar, so I can't make any promises now. But we have everyone's details on the database, as well as the form that we will receive from Zoom. So in our feedback email, we will definitely tell you what the way forward with regards to certification is. Okay, if we don't have any more hands, then I think we can go straight into our next presentation. So the first part of our workshop has really been about understanding storytelling, the things to look out for when you're telling stories, and then the practicality of putting audiovisual stories together using your cell phone, right? Now we're going to talk about, and I saw earlier there was a question in the comments about the legal considerations that you have to make when you are telling stories. And this is what this next presentation is going to touch on, right? And so our next speaker is Noor Ahmad. She is the communications manager at Media Monitoring Africa. She's also a Mail and Guardian Top 200 Young South Africans awardee. Media Monitoring Africa works to promote ethical, fair, and critical media practices as a cornerstone of democracy. The organization monitors news content to track issues such as representation, accuracy, diversity, bias, with a particular focus on children's rights, gender, and political coverage. So Noor is going to touch a little bit about those considerations that we have to make in order to make sure that the stories that we present are presented in an ethical way. So Noor, thank you so much for joining us. The floor is yours.
Thanks so much, Dimpo. And it's really great to join this webinar. It seems like it's been a really great time with quite a lot of great insights from everyone. As Dimpo mentioned, I'll just be touching on a bit of information around ethical stories.
Noor, I'm not sure if it's just me, but you are breaking. Noor?
Yeah, we can't seem to hear Noor from our side as well.
Okay, I'm just going to send her a message.
Also, because you're running a bit time, 100 at me. And
hi, Noor. Okay, I'm just going to mute her. Okay, I think she has left the call. I have sent her a message. Just, Noor, can you hear me?
I can. I'm so sorry about that. I think my internet just disconnected for a second there.
Yeah, you were breaking, but we can hear you now. You're back.
Okay, sure. What was the last thing you guys heard?
The greeting. So you can actually start from scratch.
Great. You get to see my face for more time then. Yeah, basically, thanks everyone. As Dimple mentioned, I'm the communications manager at Media Monitoring Africa. We're an organization that focuses on promoting democracy and human rights through the media. We actually believe that the media plays a very vital role in upholding our democracy, but not just in terms of reporting on what is being said, but also a very important role in crafting certain narratives around different stories. And we do believe that representation is extremely important. The way that people are represented in our media directly ties in, as we're seeing in today's current geopolitical climate and how people are being treated. So Dimple, we can, I think, skip straight to slide 4, since we've done the introductions already. And we're also running a bit behind on time, so I'll just get straight into the meat of things. Essentially, storytelling is not neutral. It's something that shapes very specific narratives, public perceptions, and ultimately even policies and legislations and laws. As I mentioned, today's geopolitical landscape where stories are being used by those in power to craft very intentional narratives to demonize either a group of people or to propagandize a situation. Stories can also shape how we essentially understand climate change. They can either mobilize action or they can even deepen despair or further climate denialism. So it's really important to make sure that your stories are dignifying specific communities and not stripping them of their agency. So because of this seriousness of stories involving climate justice, it's not just about greenhouse gases and like carbon emissions. Yes, those things are extremely important when you're reporting on things, because media and stories play a role in ensuring that people are informed and up to date with the information that they need or about climate change and its risks and how to mitigate them. But the stories that you cover are about essentially real people, their real lives and homes, health and futures. And that makes the risk of unethical storytelling even higher, especially given that climate denialism and its effects are so far-reaching at the moment. So in my presentation, we've just touched a little bit on things like that you should avoid, such as, sensationalism, exploitation, and misrepresentation. A lot of these are quite basic, I guess. So I guess this is like a bit of a climate ethical storytelling one-on-one. When it comes to sensationalism, we need to avoid disaster porn, which does nothing but create fear, but not really a deeper understanding of what a community is going through when they face climate disasters. And all it does is craft hopeless narratives about people. When it comes to exploitation, we're using, trauma for clicks, or to drive engagement to your page or your story. It can also be very exploitative in the sense that it's to borders on tokenism, where you're using a community for your benefit to sensationalize their story with no benefit to the community itself, and the community not really being empowered through that process. And then when it comes to misrepresentation, often we've seen very generalized African stories or experiences, with Africa or global South countries often painted as either helpless, monolithic, or just doomed, stripping away firstly their agency, but also any nuance or any local context in that story. And so I think it's really important that when you are telling stories, you strive for accuracy. You make sure that your facts are checked and your context of specific communities or situations is respected. The benefit of that is that it builds trust and credibility, not just with you as journalists or media personnel or anyone who tells any kind of stories in any kind of format, but also it builds trust in the entire process of people covering climate stories generally. We all know that there is a massive erosion of trust in the media at the moment. And so that trust needs to be rebuilt through ethical and also representative storytelling. And then when it comes to agency, people are often portrayed as actors in their own stories, and you make sure that they are the narrative that is crafted is that they are active participants and not just like passive victims. And then the last one would be dignity, making sure that you uphold people's dignity, you avoid pity-based narratives, and you focus more on resilience and solutions which inspire action instead of pity. So climate storytelling should definitely focus on amplifying the voices of those who are affected. The next thing that we'll be looking at is some of the key principles of ethical storytelling. So the first one is accuracy and truthfulness. So you have to always make sure that climate issues are complex, and while you don't want to speak in jargon that people don't really understand, you also don't want to fall on the other end of the spectrum where you kind of are oversimplifying facts as well. A half truth is still misinformation. So you have to make sure that you are always fact checking and verifying your sources and context, but also data before you frame or craft a specific narrative. You also need to make sure that you are respecting people and respecting their dignity. I think an easy way to do that is to just ask yourself, like, how would I want my community represented? Or would I want my community represented in this particular way? You have to make sure that you're using language and images that affirm and empower people and their humanity, not strip it away. Dignity means that you're showing people as more than just their suffering. So ask yourself whether the story empowers people that you're reporting about or empowers a situation that you're reporting on. People are very resilient in the face of climate disasters. So it's always important to touch base and ask if like your story only touches on the disaster that has happened, or does it provide a more holistic picture of the community's story? And then it's always looking at agency over victimhood. So show affected people as agents of change and not just people who are suffering. They are active participants who are like tackling the situation and not just like passive victims. An example I could give is, this is a very localized example to South Africa, but I live in Johannesburg where we're having major water crisis at the moment. And so, you know, I would ask reporters or anyone touching or tackling this story, are you only covering the water crisis from the perspective of the fact that we have a major water crisis and there's, you know, entire communities that haven't had water for months? Are you just talking about the failure of the city and the government? But are you also highlighting the work that is being done by citizens themselves or organizations like WaterCan to stand up for our rights and our dignity and ask for accountability? So I feel like you can sort of balance, make sure that you're always balancing both of those things, because it's really important to tell stories that show communities leading change and not just enduring crisis. And then, you know, we've already touched on, you know, avoiding sensationalism. We live in a very algorithm-driven era where drama or sensationalism sells, but what we forget is that it also distorts. A post with misinformation is going to get a lot of engagement. It's going to get a lot of traction on people's feeds, but that makes it all the more dangerous and it makes ethical storytelling that much more important. Sensationalist headlines might drive clicks or sell, you know, in the olden days we used to say sell papers, but they might not always be the full picture of a situation and may even strip people of their agency. So you have to basically replace crisis porn with more nuance and context and lived experiences of people. And the last one would be just making sure that you are interviewing ethically and you are documenting things in an ethical way. So always make sure you have informed consent, explain clearly to people that you're interviewing, why you're interviewing them, and how their stories will be used. And that you're not treating consent as like a checkbox or a tick box exercise, but as like a detailed conversation with people. And also using trauma-informed approaches where you are sensitive to people's situation, you don't push for details that people might not be ready to share, and you actually let them choose the information that they feel comfortable telling you as well. For you, it might just be a story, but for people, this is their lived reality. And if they're going through a very traumatic experience, you have to be very sensitive of that. And also, if you are reporting on someone else's story, you owe it to them to honor how it is being told and how it is being put out in the world. And you also need to always be open to feedback wherever possible. Let the people or the communities review their representation and see whether or not they're being represented in the right way. Yeah, and then I think again, it's just as a little summary, there's a few questions that you can ask yourself, like who's before you put out a story, just evaluate whose voice is missing, who benefits from this story, or who benefits from how the story is being told. During the story, ask yourself, am I building trust or am I just extracting quotes? After the story, you need to basically share outputs back with the communities that you are reporting on. Let them see how they're being represented and be open to feedback if they feel that they're not being represented well or accurately. And then always check your language, avoid stereotypes, avoid euphemisms or loaded terms, and always use empowering words and language where you can. And then lastly, I think we can go look at one of the examples that I included here. So this is an actual headline that I found on the internet. And it basically, as you can see, a very dramatic headline: South Africa under siege, AI reveals climate change terrifying toll. One of the ways that we can kind of look at this headline is to talk about the words that are being used. So under siege is very dramatic. You know, terrifying toll, also a very sensationalist headline. You know, it talks about AI as well. So using topical issues that are being touched on at the moment. AI is a big talking point at the moment. So that is definitely going to catch attention, and combining that with the sensationalist language, drive more clicks. And it might instill fear rather than agency or solutions. And then we can quickly look at the next example as well. So this one, it's about the president mourning flood victims, climate change blamed. So it's basically something that who is blaming climate change? What aspects of climate change is being blamed? Is that headline clear? And then I also included a little part of the article itself where this entire article essentially touched on, sorry, I also realized that this is very South African localized. So next time perhaps we'll include examples from across the continent. But essentially, it just talks about Cyril Ramaphosa and he's visiting a community, but the community themselves are not really accessed. Their voices are not represented in this story. Their feelings are not represented. It very much seems, and I mean this in a really nice way, I guess, it very much seems like a nice piece to make the president look really great, but it doesn't really recount the actual lived experiences of the people who are going through the flooding. It just says, speaking to residents, Ramaphosa recounted the story of a woman who lost both her mother and children in the floods, with one child still missing. This is a deep wound for us as a nation. But what about the story of the actual person? Why are we recounting her story through the president, but not really through her herself? And so it's just an example of how you need to make sure that you are empowering people whose actual story it is, giving them a platform to talk about their loss if they feel ready to do so, and talk about their experiences as well. And then lastly, we've done as an organization a few different reports on climate change, specifically when it comes to climate change coverage in the media, whether or not it was a priority during BRICS, and also the consequences and solutions of climate disinformation. As we said, climate denialism is having massive effects across the globe. So if you'd like to read any of those two publications, you can scan the QR codes and do so, or you can also go on our website, which is www.mediamonitoringafrica. And that way you can, sorry, I'm just trying to see, it's mediamonitoringafrica.org, and you can access some more of our work there. Yeah, that's it from my side. Thanks, Dimpo.
Thank you so, so much, Noor, for also heeding my call to just kind of speed through your presentation. But you've given us a lot to think about, and I think you just really made it practical, right? The ways in which we can make sure that we are telling stories in a way that empowers, rather than a way that kind of just speaks about the community's hardships. I think I wrote down a quote from you here that it's important that we position communities as those that are leading change rather than people who have life happening to them and they're just enduring hardship. But as mentioned, all of these presentations are going to be made available. And we're going to be sharing them just so that you are able to revisit. I'm happy to tell you that it's time for our, not happy, but it is time for our final presentation for the day. And I'm only saying I'm happy because I know it's been almost 3 hours that we have been on this call. And honestly, shout out to everyone who has been with us from the beginning. When we started at 1 p.m., I see a lot of names that are still on the call with us. We really appreciate it. And we are about to wrap up. I'm now going to call on Rowan Pybus. I hope I'm saying that correctly. Rowan, please do correct me when you come onto the platform if I am not. Sunshine Cinema is a nonprofit organization that uses solar-powered mobile cinemas to provide media training and job opportunities for young people in Southern Africa. It uses a mobile cinema kit, the Sandbox, to screen African films and documentaries in rural and peri-urban communities, sparking conversations and creating platforms for social change. So I think this is a very beautiful way of how storytelling and climate can come together, where Sunshine Cinema is using renewable energy to power the cinema boxes that they then take into communities to screen films and to start those important conversations. Rowan, I believe you're going to be sharing the presentation from your side.
Yes.
And so the stage is yours completely.
Dimpo, thank you very, very much. A quick technical check here. So let's see if this all works. And I just want to get a comment from you, Dimpo. Are you seeing a keynote presentation coming up on the screen now?
Not yet.
Not yet. All right,
Not yet. I'm also, okay, there, I found you. I'm just trying to.
How's that look?
There we go. You're on now.
And how does that look?
There we go. Perfect.
All right. Well, let's dive straight into it. Seeing as that I'm keeping you all from the rest of your days, and I do want to just start by saying thank you for the opportunity to talk about what we do, and I will try be as succinct and also try fly through the presentation in the form of a story. Really, the 5 points that I was asked to communicate on are stories for social impact, and then number 2, the social and impact value of film screenings, then how to plan a screening, and then how to get communities to engage with your story. So really, for me, it always comes back to this. When we as a media communication agency travel the world and do ethical storytelling, which I really appreciate Noah's presentation, it was spot on, is that you discover issues and then some issues bite down hard on you. And one of the issues that sits with me is the idea that we are rapidly deforesting Central Africa, and that includes neighboring countries to South Africa, and not excluding Namibia, Botswana, Zimbabwe, Zambia, Mozambique. So this question of what does all of this charcoal being sold on the side of national highways is part of how I'm going to answer and speak to the 5 points. Essentially, you look at a lot of the roads that you travel through in Africa and you discover that there's something going on. This amount of charcoal should not be sold on a random road between Joburg and Maputo. This led us as Makulu, which is our impact communications agency, to tell a story. And between 2005 and 2010, we were telling stories for a who's who of global brands. One particular company, Volkswagen, took us on a 12-country production, and that led us to spending our own profits on trying to tell our own stories as a communication agency. And that led us to meeting an amazing man named Lloyd Manina, who went from being a charcoal burner to actually essentially a reforester in Zambia and leading a very large conversation about the need to do something about charcoal burning. The film that we made about Lloyd Manina attracted a lot of attention. So I do want to say that when you do follow ethical storytelling guidelines, you can actually get to a place where a powerful story emerges, and then you can self-publish that story. And we were very surprised to get a call from both the United Nations and National Geographic because of this particular climate change story. And that repackaged our entire communication agency and our entire client base, including now working with the United Nations Human Rights Council, straight out of Geneva, etc. And so what we thought about was, if you have a story, what does the story do and how can it be of use to someone like Lloyd Manina? And that is the accountability aspect that I really hope lands with everybody, that if you do tell a story, you are not going out there to just have it get clicks for your YouTube and your revenue streams. You're actually beholden to the person who shared their life and set an example that is worth sharing so that other people can follow. This led us to think, how can we get this this film back to Lloyd? And so we took all of our prize money and we reinvested it into forming the Sunbox. And now Sunshine Cinema has utilized the Sunbox for many years now to essentially democratize cinema screenings, train young people to host their own screenings. We have a number of young people from all over the continent that have been trained through our program. We operate now in South Africa, Malawi, Mozambique, Eswatini, Zimbabwe, and Kenya. And the idea is that cinema is the seed of a really important moment for people. One particular interlude that I hope lands is, for example, a ranger in Rwanda told me once that I asked him, why do you look after the gorillas? And he said, somebody came and showed me a film about gorillas in my village. And it validated the entire need for what I hope also lands is the understanding of what is impact producing within film distribution. So a lot of people don't understand. They think impact producing and they'll lump it with a whole bunch of other things, other industries. But in the film space, impact producing is when you take a film and you have it go out into a site-specific region and have it function as a catalyst for relevant dialogue or social change. And then what you have is impact facilitators. And what we've done at Sunshine Cinema has been both an impact producing strategic partner to many organizations and films, but we also train impact facilitators to go out and host screenings. And that is what we call the Sunbox Ambassador Network. And so when you look at the young people, we have a boot camp, we bring 20 young people. This now goes to what is the value of film screenings? Well, we've seen the value of film screenings, and we've seen what happens when young people are handed 100 African-made documentaries and feature films. They're trained through a course that we developed at the University of Cape Town in partnership with the Film and Media, Dr. Leonie Marstorp, Mickey Redlinghurst, that essentially gets people to understand how do you use a film to really move the needle within your community. And to date, we've run the course for 4 years, and it's globally accessible, and we're seeing a lot of people appreciate just a way to get a deep dive into how to use film as a tool for social change. So it's called the Impact Facilitator course. If you're interested, please look it up. But really, it comes down to this question again and again: why cinema? And you know, I want to use this as a kind of way of answering how to plan a screening. If you look at this picture, this is in very far-flung, deep Namibia, and this is a film called Measures of Men about the German-led genocide in Namibia, where we were lobbying to have the skulls of people that are still being held in Berlin returned to Namibia so that the Herero and Nama people can honor their dead. And we worked with the paramount chief of the Nama Nation. We worked with epigenetic trauma specialists. We really curated and planned a number of site-specific screenings that were not only where the film was made in Namibia from a location perspective, but more where it was needed the most. And so when you plan a screening, some of those questions are very important to ask. I just want to also just say that you're ultimately sparking something, and for us, it's about sparking this dream in you. As the audience member, you might think you know, and then the film can nudge you in the right direction. A lot of time, I find that film has inspired me and really, given me a bit of a catalyst to take more risks and dive deeper into certain issues. And it sort of affirms your convictions that are bubbling under the surface. So the magic of cinema, it just cannot be underestimated. And what we are now doing is a project called Seeds of Cinema. And our work now speaks to transfrontier conservation areas and wildlife corridors across multiple transfrontier parks in the SADC region, really just helping rural communities to connect early on the value of conservation and wildlife preservation. And that has been some of the most encouraging work that we've done. It's the idea that the cinema can reach very far and underserved communities, and then you can mobilize with partnerships. And so when you say plan a screening, it's all about your partners. It's about understanding a community mapping and who's there and who cares. And through a lot of doors being slammed in your face as a young person, and in my own experience, you start to understand who's willing and able and who's resistant. And through that, you start to understand some of the levers. And it does get quite tense at time when you as an activist and a filmmaker start running up against the very people that are essentially creating the problem you're campaigning against. So we teach a lot about your own personal safety and understanding when you do and uncover the rot within your community, what to do and how to navigate that. It's not easy. So yeah, I think one of the other examples is that you can use cinema for really powerful education. And in the case of our work with the Rainforest Alliance in Malawi, we made a series of films in vernacular languages. We're based on farmers that have done the Farmer Field School program and had testimonies of their success and how their lives had been changed. And just by having those films in a local language loaded onto the Sunbox and then having funding raised to have a 6 to 9 month sustained cinema screening of those short films within rural communities, we saw that the Farmer Field School was struggling to get intake. And after we did the screening, they really were overbooked, and real change started to happen at scale in the Malanje area of Malawi. And so these case studies of how you can use cinema to just enrich lives, simply passing relevant local experiences onto other people, your neighbor, you can see a huge amount of success. This entire endeavor has led us to think about what happens to the beneficiaries that are in our network. We've started something called the Impact Facilitator Network, which is the 80 young people of the last 4 years of cohorts, as well as partner NGOs that have got really skilled and capable young people. and we are mobilizing them now. And so the whole idea really has been distilled now within specifically South Africa, but I think in all the countries we operate, is to use the ideas of young people to ignite other young people. And cinema can do that, we know that, and we're very proud of the fact that the young people are leading this conversational cinema network, throughout the SADC region. And one new wonderful, to get to the end of my presentation, is that within this accountability and honoring the people in your stories, and then honoring the communities, as Noor mentioned, with high ethics and high consideration. One of the most amazing things that's happened recently is that we've got a call from National Geographic again. This time, instead of a story, they saw what we were doing with Sunshine Cinema and have recently awarded us a large contract to do cinema screenings, focusing on how their network of National Geographic explorers are wanting to spark conversation wherever they are around the world. And they're all coming to South Africa for the National Geographic Explorers Festival. And this accountability leads somewhere. So if you are interested in using cinema and stories on the ground within your community, I do sit here as some form of proof within the team that we lead that it does work. So, it all comes down to what issue is motivating you and how accountable are you going to be once you've discovered that issue. And I still look at what we can do and work towards conservation and climate change initiatives that have nothing to do, and this is where it gets controversial. I really have worked with the highest level of UN organizations, and what matters most to me is not the global conversation about climate change, it's the local conversation about climate change, and mobilizing practical and pragmatic people to simply say, no, I won't allow any more trees to be cut down, but people need energy, so okay, what do we do? And so really accountability to not just making a film and then distributing the film, but actually accountability to the issue that has hit you in the chest and stirred you in the heart and made you feel like you need your whole life to change. It's really important. And that issue could be, we know them. There are so many challenges facing communities around the world. And one of them is that we really do need to solve the energy crisis and stop cutting down trees, because that does drive provable climate change scenarios within the Zambia and Maputo corridor. And that's the SADC in me. That's the regional proof that we need to do more in this space. And we have now got more tools and more collaboration and more skilled young people who can make great stories at a hyperlocal level and then get online and distribute it either through TikTok or something. But we need to understand that change happens practically in the room. You have to get in the room with people face to face and debate each other and change minds, face to face, because a lot of what Noor was alluding to in terms of the sensationalist algorithm, that doesn't help us at a local level. So I'm encouraged and really doing as much as I can with my co-founder, Sidel Willis-Smith, who's currently in New York at the UN, the Assembly, the General Assembly, is to sit here and say, we know that if we just help young people with a cinema kit or a camera or something that they feel will help them address the issue they're passionate about, change can actually occur. So I thank you, and I just ask everyone on the call, will you help us all to shine and get these stories out there? The Sandbox kits, we are funded. So if you would like to have a partnership conversation with us and get one of these cinemas going into your community, please feel free to reach out to us. So thank you very much for listening.
Thank you so much, Rowan. And there are definitely a few partnership proposals, I beg your pardon, already happening in the chat box. 2 from Uganda, 2 people saying we absolutely need this kind of thing in Uganda. 1 more person in Cameroon. Doliyamba Bara Gabriel saying, this is an eye-opening presentation using cinema to enrich lives down to the grassroots and to spark conversation and accountability. Remarkable. So thank you so much, Rowan, for sharing about the work that you're doing at the cinema, but I also think just opening our eyes to some of the possibilities that do exist, right, on how exactly we can take stories into communities and ensure that stories don't just live on YouTube, but that they have an actual impact on the communities that we tell stories about. Rowan, I'm just going to ask you, I see Bertha has left the Sunshine Cinema websites, but if you don't mind, I'm going to ask you to leave your email in the chat box for some people who may have had questions, but because of time, we're not going to be able to get around them. Perfect. So where has the time gone? Where has the time gone? I can't believe that it's been 3 hours of us just learning together. And as Imani mentioned, us peeling back the layers of this onion, this beautiful, juicy onion called storytelling. We were able to establish what storytelling is, why it's important for us in the African context, why it's important for us in the advocacy work that we're trying to do within climate change. And then we also got very practical, right? And we looked at how do we craft stories? And how do we craft stories that are going to be compelling, that are going to be engaging, that people want to see, but that also show ethics and a lot of respect and dignity for the subjects the subjects whose stories that we are telling, right? We learned that we have a responsibility towards the people who trust us to share their stories. And then I think we ended off perfectly with Rowan, who just through the demonstration of the work of Sunshine Cinema, telling us about the very real impact that our stories can have on communities when we package them well, and we package them in a way that's innovative. And with that, we have come to the end of the ACRP storytelling workshop. Thank you so, so much to each and every one of you for showing up with your curiosity and your courage. Storytelling is not just about words, right? But it's about shaping how we see ourselves and how we connect with others, and also how we make an impact. Before I leave, a few notes. We are going to be sharing these presentations with all of you. We're also going to be sharing some feedback with links to all of the organizations that spoke during today's workshop. And then we'll also give you feedback with regards to any kind of certification. Now, there's an African proverb that says, until the lion learns how to write, every story will glorify the hunter. And I think this reminds us about the power, right, and responsibility we hold in owning our narratives. If we don't tell our stories, someone else will, and they may not tell them truthfully. And so as we leave, I hope that you carry this reminder with you that your story matters, your voice matters, and together our stories really have the power to transform communities, right? And so my call to action to you is that you keep writing, you keep speaking, and you keep claiming your space in the global climate landscape. Before we all rush to log off, my colleague is just reminding me that we haven't taken a group photo. So I am going to ask everyone to please switch your cameras on. I just need to change my view. There we go. If you're in a position to, I'm going to ask you to please switch your camera on so that I can get a group picture of us. Where have all these faces been? All of these pretty faces. Okay. In 3, 2, 1, smile. Okay, and then the second slide. In 3, 2, 1, smile, everyone. Beautiful. Thank you so much for joining us, everyone. We wish you a wonderful rest of the day and a lovely weekend.
Thank you.